Hello, everybody. My name is Pia Kapoor Bhatia, and I'm going to be talking to you today about the impact of unsustainable development and climate change on the livelihood of Mumbai's native communities. Mumbai is a coastal megacity that is full of contrasts, a place where slums and high rises coexist, and the cosmopolitan exists alongside poverty and deprivation. Due to the fast paced urbanization, and unplanned, uneven, and non integrated growth in the city, it has had a negative implication on the ecosystem and livelihoods dependent on it. It has caused the displacement of the natural resource dependent communities and an increase in the inequality and marginalization these communities face. Mumbai's development paradigm. Post liberalization in the year 1991, there has been more focused development plans that want to create a world city with offshore financial facilities and turn Mumbai into the Shanghai of India. The lopsided development planning has no regard for social or ecological sustainability, disruption of the larger ecosystem, or the environmental health. This has led to pollution in the form of chemical waste, effluents, garbage waste, and so on and so forth into the ecosystem, the destruction of the coastal wetlands and mangroves for construction, which is very important actually, a space where breeding takes place of fish, and this has resulted in a decrease in fish stocks, displacement of the fishing communities in the coast due to the development projects and infrastructure projects, an increase in economic activities, encroachment of coastal areas and seashore areas by the development state builders, and infrastructure and recreational projects, and which is supported by the state policy and market forces that encourage encroachment of the coastal zones. The forested areas are places where the trees are cut and cleared for development, such as building of hotels, petrol pumps, metros, residential areas, leading to negative implications on livelihoods of the communities that are dependent on them, and also higher rates of human and animal conflicts. The climate change implications on livelihoods. The climate change impacts such as the sea level rise, sea surface temperature increasing, increase in frequency and intensity of storms, warming of the oceans and ocean acidification, erratic rainfall. All of these have negative implications on the small scale fisheries because they impact the productivity of the ecosystem and lead to extinction of fish species, distribution of fish species, migration of fish species, and so on and so forth. And especially when economically important fish are affected, this impacts small scale fisheries and leads to loss of income of the communities that are dependent on them. Urban farming communities would also be impacted due to climate change impacts, such as saltwater intrusion, erratic rainfall, flooding, and so on. Native communities of Mumbai are so many different kind of tribal and indigenous communities that were dependent on the ocean and forest economy for their resources that enable them to secure their livelihoods through sale and barter of these ecosystem services. The British Empire often compared these tribals to the robber barons of the Industrial Revolution and denied their access to the community forests and the ecosystem services of India by prohibiting grazing of their cattle, harvesting crops in the forest, and this led to conflict between the administration and extreme poverty of the Koli and Varli communities as they lost their access to livelihood sources. Later on in the year 1976, there were false reports that stated that these tribals caused accelerated depletion of the forest activities that in turn caused their displacement from their forest communities and made them dependent on the state, and led to criminalization of their traditions as well. Right now, in 1996, they have been placed in passive encroacher positions in their own land, not allowed to farm, cut wood, fish, or raise animals. They have now become trespassers in their own land, and this has led to loss of income sources for them. These forest dependent communities, we're going to be talking about two of them, that is one in R.A. Mill Colony and Sanjay Gandhi National Park, and they are farmers for generations, fish and involved in fisheries and livestock rearing. They grow crops for subsistence and sale in markets. They also depend on the mangrove forests for medicinal plants, firewood, fruit, honey, and so on, which they also sell. And so, due to the construction and development activity, they are losing their farmlands, and their tribal villages are disappearing in the name of development through construction of roads, highways, hotels, and residential spaces. So, as we can see in the picture on the right, it is painted by a Varli artist, and it depicts the pollution, the urbanization, the construction that has had implication on their livelihood, which is farming, livestock rearing, and so on and so forth. And the fishery dependent communities include the Koli community, which are the original inhabitants of the city. Their livelihoods are dependent on the sea completely, and the coastal lands that are adjacent to the sea for their traditional fishing activities. They have customary rights to the sea and to the land, which are not formally recognized, and they are losing their land to the unfettered construction and encroachment, to urbanization, and they are losing out their fishing zones, landing grounds, and common areas for fishing and shore related activities related to fishing. And these fishermen are pushed out of their rightful land by this developer lobby and the real estate developers who are capturing their land. And climate change, of course, is impacting the fish stocks and productivity of the ecosystem that impacts them indirectly through the habitat and diet of the fish that is being impacted. And so there are basically unsustainable fishing practices, industrial fishing practices, overfishing has all impacted the livelihood of these communities. The way forward: strategic adaptation in urban governance to strengthen the social justice and lower risks of vulnerable communities has to be undertaken. Urban planning through a transformative approach needs to be people centered and has to look at risk reduction and long term goals of social justice and ecological justice. Both these contexts have to be looked upon, and pro-poor adaptation strategies need to be developed with inclusion of the knowledge of local communities who should be included in the formulation of alternative development plans. Fishermen and other communities who have no political representation and are disempowered due to fishing policy which is unfavorable to their livelihoods, restrict their access and entitlements to the sea. They need to be taken into consideration to frame the policies so that they are not powerless. Advocacy of the people and advocacy for nature cannot be separated, and the relationship between social justice and environmental issues, indigenous rights, poverty and degradation of the environment all need to be considered when formulating advocacy plans. Community based natural resource management programs and policies all need to take in goals of sustainability, social justice, and environmental health involving local communities who are adept at management of forest and ocean resources using their indigenous knowledge. And they need to be entrusted with community rights over water bodies and the protection of the ecosystem. So the traditional knowledge system need to be integrated with the scientific management policies so that their perspectives are not excluded from the policy. And local communities are more interested in management of these resources in a sustainable manner as they are more aware of the ecological practices and processes, and they are effectively able to manage resources using a traditional form of access. And so one cannot separate the social challenges of poverty, employment, and equality from challenges faced on a planetary level, such as greenhouse gas emissions, resource depletion, biodiversity, climate change, and environmental issues. And they all need to be considered together. And an integrated approach needs to balance the relationship between the people and the planet using a socio-ecological systems perspective to ensure the critical thresholds are not reached and understand the interconnected nature of both environmental conservation and coastal livelihoods for fitting solutions to be found. And the concern for communities that are dependent on the sea and the coast, they cannot just look at exploitation commercially of these areas. And we need to look at not marginalizing these indigenous communities as well. Most ecologically sensitive places in the world are biologically diverse and close to human habitation. And so these areas must be protected, and as well as the basic indigenous and tribal communities, their rights and human rights have to be protected, and the common property resources that they depend on for livelihood. The traditional collective rights need to be merged together with national laws and international standards to form new forms of management, preventing traditional communities from living like ecological refugees and preventing the denial of the customary rights and causing their displacement. So we should not ignore urban claims to the environment, and we need to shift our rural bias to urban environmentalism as well to understand the Adivasi land rights and tribal land rights of the people who live in the urban environments as well, and address the ecological conflicts and bring together human rights and environmental conservation in the city space whilst moving away from management policies that lead to cultural and economic social marginalization of these native communities. Therefore, we cannot have a short sighted urban management, and we need to have both socially and ecologically inclusive management policies to make the coastal and forest ecology related to livelihoods both have to be conserved and maintained. There's to be concern for social justice and sustainability. Thank you so much for your time. Uh, Thank you.